No, no, no.
Hello and welcome to the Red Deer Museum and Art Gallery. My name is Joanne Gruenberg and I am a Curator of Art here at the museum. Before we begin with this afternoon's talk, I would just like to read our land acknowledgement first. So in the spirit of reconciliation, the MAG recognizes that this land on which we live is at the convergence of Treaty 6 territory, representing the Nahiawak, Cree, Saulteaux, and Dene peoples, and Treaty 7 territory representing the Blackfoot, Tsuut'ina, Kainai, Piikani, and Stoney Nakoda peoples, as well as the Métis people. We strive in the spirit of the treaties to keep this a place of trust, friendship, and promise. We acknowledge that promise and we invite you to share in our respect for our future together and to move forward in a good way. So again, welcome to the museum. I am standing in our art gallery in the exhibition Prairie Vernacular. So the word prairie we probably all understand, but vernacular might not be as familiar. And all that refers to is the fact that there are different types of artists in this exhibition. Untrained or self-taught artists who would have produced work that we would maybe commonly call folk art, and trained or professional artists who often drew inspiration from those other artists. But vernacular can also refer to a language that is held in common by a group of people in a particular area. And in this case, for those artists, I think that language is the shared memories or experiences of what it means to live on the prairies. So this exhibition is thematic, and today I will be looking at the theme of folk, funk, playfulness, and humor. So folk art, we kind of understand humor and playfulness we do as well, but I'm just going to talk briefly about the funk art movement, which might not be as familiar for people. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the camera from my partner, Emma, and I will sort of let you look at the gallery while I tell you a little bit about funk art, and then I will move on and we'll kind of look at some specific pieces of artwork. So I'm just going to take the camera here, and I will just kind of walk through the gallery while I tell you about funk art. So funk art is an American art movement, specifically from the San Francisco Bay Area in the 1960s. The term funk coming from the jazz musical term funky, so they just chose that name. The funk art movement was really a reaction to the abstract expressionism that was in vogue at that time, so think Jackson Pollock. It was anti-establishment and sought to bring back figurative art, art from real object sources, rather than non-figurative work like the paintings of Jackson Pollock, who was using those splashing and pouring techniques of paint onto a canvas to create those abstract expressionist paintings. It was also rooted in the idea of self-identification. So funk artists often created art that was very personal and specific to their own experiences and feelings. Found or scavenged objects were often used to make assemblages, a practice that refers back to the folk art of some of the early untrained artists in this exhibition. But ceramics, especially non-functional ceramics, were also an important part of the funk movement, especially in Saskatchewan. The ceramic movement within funk art was started by an artist named Robert Arneson, who taught at the University of California, Davis. And this ceramic movement was brought back to the prairies by students who studied in California with Arneson. And this included well-known Canadian artists Victor Sikansky and Joe Fafard. So these Saskatchewan funk artists began friendships with some of their earlier vernacular folk artists who were already living on the prairies. And so you can see we're actually open now, so we have real live people in our gallery, which is great. So these funk artists shared with those untrained artists their inspiration and the values of the prairie experience, and they drew on their work and allowed it to influence their own. There was a real sense of artistic exchange between these two artists, between these two groups of artists. And this is evident in the connections between works in this exhibition.
So we're going to follow a thread or a web of relationships. I'm just kind of going around in a circle here. And we are going to look at how those relationships impacted these two groups of artists. So the first piece that we're going to look at is just around the corner. Sorry, Holly. And we are going to look at a piece down here. And it is called Foothill Pasture by an artist named Harvey McInnes. And Harvey McInnes was born in 1904 in Ontario, but he moved to Saskatchewan in 1910, and he farmed there until his retirement in 1971. And he was a self-taught artist, and he started painting using a paint-by-number kit that was given to him by his sister. So in this colored pencil drawing, we see cows, we see a horse in a pasture with mountains in the distance. So a very southern Alberta type of scene. And the fence in the foreground here is very precise, and it looks like it might have been drawn with a ruler. So we could say that this piece is a bit naive or a bit simplistic, but he was drawing on his own experiences as a farmer, and he was depicting a landscape that he would have understood. So Harvey McInnes became friends with that funk-influenced group of artists that I mentioned earlier. And from there, he gained the attention of art curators and other artists, one of them being Joe Fafard. So if I move to the right here, you can see a sculpture by Joe Fafard. We'll see if we can get it all in. And this is a sculptural portrait of Harvey McInnes. So Joe Fafard studied at the University of Manitoba and Pennsylvania State University, and he taught sculpture and pottery at the University of Saskatchewan. And as we can see here, he was a master sculptor. So I think that he has captured Harvey McInnes entirely. So I'm not sure, it's under glass, so it is hard to see, but you can see that he's got wrinkles around his eyes and he's got stubble on his chin. And you can see moles and veins on his hands and age spots. Even his fingernails are lifelike. And he's even captured Harvey McInnes' mannerisms, his crossed legs, his crossed hands. And it's probably kind of hard to see, but he has used different glazes. So the buttons on his shirt are sort of glossy and shiny. And then even down on his boots, the eyelets for his laces look like they could be brass. And then even the chair, he's sort of created it to look like it's been worn and rubbed by people sitting on it. So the sculpture is kiln-fired ceramic with glazes for those shiny bits. But he's also used acrylic paint for the clothing and the face and hands, and that's how he's able to make it look so lifelike. So this would have been a very time-intensive piece to create, and it kind of speaks to the relationship that these two artists would have had with one another. So sort of following this thread of relationships, we are going to go around the corner. And I'm going to show you another piece here. I'm going to show you this piece here. So this is a piece called Joe Fafard and Family, Pence, Saskatchewan. And it is by an artist named Molly Lenhart. She was born in 1914, and she's another one of those self-taught artists. She ran a variety store with her husband in Melville, Saskatchewan, and she kind of painted whenever she could. And often her paintings drew on her Ukrainian heritage. But in this case, she's paying homage to Joe Fafard, whose sculpture we just saw. So this is an oil on canvas painting. And I am assuming one of these individuals in the canoe is Joe Fafard and perhaps his wife and children. They're obviously on a lake or a pond or a creek just on the edge of town. We can see the grain elevator with the name of the town. So these three paintings are just a few examples of those relationships that were formed by self-taught folk artists on the prairies and the professionally trained artists who were influenced by that funk movement coming out of the States. And it just shows us how much exchange there must have been between those artists in the 60s, 70s, and possibly even into the 80s. So this funk theme is just really fun. It encompasses a lot of humor and playfulness, which is a part of this larger theme. So I'm just going to show you two more pieces, and then we'll look at something else. This, I'll just show you quickly. This is Molly Lenhart as well. So you can see that Ukrainian influence in this painting here. So I will just go around the corner here. One piece I wanted to show you. So this is a piece by well-known Canadian ceramicist Vic Sikansky. He was a member of faculty at the University of Regina, and he grew up in Regina in a largely immigrant neighborhood where large gardens really were essential to sustaining a family. And this piece is called Heritage Seeds. So I think it maybe refers to the produce in their laps, but also maybe the couple sitting there. We see, like I said, we see an elderly couple, and they're proudly holding their garden bounty in their laps. But when we move around to the side, we can see that the couple is actually the couch that they're sitting on. So perhaps they're very comfortable with one another. So there's a real sense of whimsy and playfulness in this piece that draws on that funk aesthetic and philosophy. But he's also drawing on traditional and really personal themes of prairie culture, gardening, and the immigrant experience he encountered growing up. So I'll just show you one more of these sort of funk-influenced artists around the corner here. Let's see. So this piece here, it's quite small. It is by an artist named David Thauberger. And again, he was one of those artists. I believe he went to University of California, Davis as well, and came back to the prairies. This is called Power Line. This is an acrylic painting, and it's got very sharp lines and very flat planes and really no shadowing. So the colors and the objects in the painting are quite flat as well. So it's quite technically proficient, but he has used what is sometimes called a low art technique, where he's used an art and craft material. So it's probably hard to see in here, but he has flicked glitter onto this piece, and I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see it or not. Maybe a little bit. So that's very much an arts and crafts type of material, glitter. So even though he's a professionally trained artist, he's reaching back and finding inspiration in those folk art techniques. So the other part of this talk, or this theme, was playfulness and humor. And playfulness and humor is often a factor in working through artistic ideas by allowing for curiosity and experimentation. But unlike playfulness, humor can often have a dark side to it. And if I turn around here, we can see that sort of dark humor in the work of Jude Griebel. So we're looking at two of Jude's work. The first is called Ground Drinker. Come around the side so you can see it a little better. So both of his works are amalgam sculptures. And he's using humor and playfulness to leaven the darker themes he's exploring. In the case of Ground Drinker, he's exploring ideas around perhaps some of the negative aspects of the oil industry, which could encompass pollution and in a broader sense, humanity's voracious appetite for consumption. So we're sort of seeing an anthropomorphic oil derrick that looks as if he's drinking endlessly from the oil reserves in the ground's surface. And there's just no end to his need. But if I go around here, we'll look at his other sculpture. And this one is called Grandmother. So in this piece, I'll try to get down because it's quite low. In this piece, he's speaking perhaps to the ideas of loss, and in this case, perhaps of a grandmother. My interpretation of this piece is that the idea of a grandmother is closely tied to the idea of home or comfort. But in this case, we can see that this house appears to be abandoned and a bit dilapidated, and it appears as if the light and life has gone out of it. But he also explores ideas around changes in rural life in his work, especially the rejection of an agricultural life for an urban one by younger generations, which would explain the feeling of abandonment of this house. So it is somewhat humorous. He's used human hair on the roof, and the windows almost make it look like a face. He's even included a doily, which is something very common to find in a grandmother's home. So again, he's used that dark humor to explore sort of more difficult subject matter. But if I move into the other gallery, we'll just speak briefly, or I'll just talk briefly about a couple of pieces that really are, I guess, more playful. So if you come with me through here, go around the corner to this piece over here. Whoop. It's quite big, so we'll see if I can get it all in. So this is a whimsical piece. It's by a man named Sidney Kelsey, and it's called Blue Picture Stand. Hi, guys. This is a piece from the collection of the Alberta Foundation for the Arts. And when I looked it up, I came across a little passage that the AFA had written about it. And it was really quite interesting. It showed how this artist really fit into that self-taught or folk artist category. So I'll just kind of read what they said about this piece. It says, a Black man of Caribbean heritage, Sidney Kelsey was born in Windsor, Nova Scotia in 1928. He joined the Canadian Navy at the age of 16 before going to work at logging camps. After suffering serious injury to his legs in a logging accident, he went to work as a house painter, but he had to give that up in 1979 due to his old injuries, and at the age of 53 and retired, he started fashioning cut-out wood shapes, which he painted in colorful hues and hung in the yard of his Edmonton home. Passers-by began taking an interest in the hanging artworks and would occasionally ask to buy individual pieces. Kelsey would often comply, and in this way, he could supplement the meager income that he shared with his wife, Louise. Gradually, his art began to attract attention from serious collectors as well as art dealers. Completely self-taught, Kelsey would accurately be described as a folk artist. His art was a product of his own imagination, although critics have pointed out connections to other yard art creators. Mostly African American, it is speculated these individuals may have been carrying on a traditional West African practice of hanging charms in trees around the home in order to protect the homeowner and provide healing and spiritual affirmation. Kelsey didn't have much to say about such theories, however, and in fact was reluctant to even call himself an artist. Nonetheless, what he made was appreciated by long-time art collectors and by ordinary people with no knowledge of art. So many of these folk artists or self-taught artists, as this little excerpt said, didn't even consider themselves artists. It was more of a hobby, something they did in their spare time, and they wouldn't consider themselves artists. But here he is in an exhibition, And his work has been featured in I think there was an exhibition in 1996 at the McMichael Collection of Canadian Art. So he may not think he's an artist, but obviously he is. But I really do love this piece because it's immediately identifiable as yard art. I can see it being at home in sort of a yard in a small prairie town next to a caragana bush and a chain link fence. I wouldn't be surprised to stumble across something like this if I were in a smaller town somewhere. So the final piece that we're going to look at is over here. And again, this falls within playfulness and humor. And this piece is by Jordan Van Sewell, and it is called Oil Bath. And it's low fire clay and glazes. It's quite shiny. As a child, Jordan Van Sewell was quite interested in cartooning, and he merged this with his ceramic practice. And in this piece, he describes it, and I'll just read his own words here. He says, most vehicles used to have an oil bath air cleaner above the carburetor when cars carbureted. This play on words sees a robot bathing. Its emoluments are oil cans of 1030. The human qualities of grooming have made it to the machine age. The serenity and relaxation that may come with bathing are, unfortunately, lost on this emerging segment of the modern world. So in a humorous way, he's exploring ideas around mechanization of the modern world and how that interacts with very human concerns, including how it may impact our perceptions of leisure time. So that sort of concludes my look at the themes of folk, funk, playfulness, and humor in this exhibition, Prairie Vernacular. It's such a rich exhibition full of work by Prairie artists who are connected to one another in so many ways. There are over 100 pieces of artwork in the show and about 75 artists, so we're really just scratching the surface with these talks. But I will turn the camera around here so I can say goodbye. So if you can make it in, I really do encourage you to come in and see the exhibition before it ends in middle of August. In 2 weeks' time, my colleague Lynn McCore will be back, and she'll be speaking on another theme in this exhibition, fantasy and the surreal. So I'd just like to thank you for joining me today, and I hope you can make the next talk. Thanks so much.